that doesn't allow concealed carry anyway. That's Illinois.
I believe so, yeah.
But I think the majority of states have the castle doctrine. But now some of the states have, like Florida's, the stand your ground laws. Now, explain that if you would.
In every state, there's usually statutory law that justifies somebody to use force against somebody else in defense of themselves or somebody or others. And you have to be justified to use force. That may include force as a last resort, and so that may require, to prove that it was a last resort, there may be the requirement to try to retreat from the threat if possible. And so my understanding of the stand your ground law is that you still need to be justified to use force, but a requirement to try to retreat if feasible is eliminated.
It's eliminated.
That's my understanding.
So you don't have to
retreat.
If you're out on the streets and feel threatened.
My understanding is you still have to be justified to use force. It has to be warranted, but that requirement to retreat is not there.
But what about, isn't there some kind of requirement that whatever you use to defend yourself has to be sort of appropriate for the circumstance?
Yes.
Like if somebody, I don't know, just sort of slaps you and then you shoot them, that doesn't seem to fit?
It doesn't fit. No, I mean, it's very strict with deadly force. It has to be, for us to use deadly force, it has to be a dire situation where if it's not used, there's a high likelihood of death or great bodily harm.
I see. That seems fair. All right, now, let's go into something else. Now, years ago, I think in the 80s, maybe 90s, New York City, which had a really high crime rate, did some things which lowered the crime rate drastically, I understand. And it was based on something called the broken windows theory.
Okay.
I've read a little bit about it, but I'm sure you know much more than I do. So if you would explain that.
Oh, sure. It was developed by George Kelling and James Wilson, published in the 80s. And basically, people are concerned with crime, but they're also concerned with urban decay and civil disorder. And so there's different communities are different, and the theory is that if there's urban decay, that can invite crime into certain communities. And so the broken window theory is that if there's windows are broken or there's property damage or graffiti or spray paint, it sends the message that there's urban decay and that nobody cares. And so if there isn't informal social control or other actions to repair the damage, it can look like an attractive neighborhood for people to move into that may want to commit crime and do things that aren't in the best interest of the community.
So, a neighborhood will start to have broken windows, graffiti, and it's not taken care of. So there becomes more of that. And maybe because of that, the people that are living there start feeling like they need to move to a safer neighborhood.
They do, and what I think the finding was that most residents are fearful of crime, but what they're really fearful of is being harassed on the street, concerned about being followed, loud, intoxicated people on the sidewalk. And so the broken windows theory, it kind of advocated having police fulfill a role for, instead of just solving crimes, to work to combat disorder in the streets.
Right, but so these people are moving out, we'll say middle class tenants that live in the area, they move out, and now the landlords need to keep the places rented, so they have to lower the rent in order to entice people to come and move in, and so maybe it's less savory types that move in, which tend to have maybe a higher crime rate.
Could be.
And so maybe that's how it trends.
I think so.
All right. Anyway, it worked. It seemed to have worked great.
It worked. They did studies, particularly foot patrol studies in Newark, New Jersey, and they did some other studies just about the type of communities. There was a study done by Philip Zimbardo. He was a Stanford University psychologist, and he took a car, put it up with the hood up in New York, I think in the Bronx, and within an hour it was stripped of everything. Kind of a transient community, not a lot of people that had stayed for decades or for generations. Same thing in Palo Alto, California, and it virtually was untouched until about a week later he started damaging it, and then other people joined in. So I think the point was that intervention needs to happen with the community also to make it people invested in it for informal social control.
I see. All right. Let's go into some other of these. Probably the one that's gotten the most coverage is profiling. Explain what that is, if you would, and what police departments are doing about it. Maybe some of them are profiling and some aren't. I don't think it's illegal to profile, but it's just considered not really the way to go. It's not politically acceptable.
Yeah, it's a difficult issue. There's racial disparity in the justice system. It's been that way for a while, for a long time. Some officers are proactive and they work hard, and what they're trying to do is to do street-level drug enforcement or traffic enforcement, and their goal may be to keep a neighborhood safe and to establish a presence, but people may perceive it as being profiling, and that's disturbing, to residents. And so there's been different committees and groups to study profiling, and different initiatives have been enacted. A lot of departments are keeping records of officers are recording the ethnicity and genders of people that they pull over, so there can be transparency.
Just for our viewers, in case they don't know what the term means, that's where the police would focus on a particular racial group or ethnic group and stop them more often than others, thinking that there's a higher likelihood of crimes being committed by that group.
I think they focus on neighborhoods, but they may be neighborhoods where they're minority, a large minority population, or the officers may be of a different ethnicity, and there may be actions or perceptions that create feelings of profiling.
So it's your sense that most police departments do not profile?
Hard to say. I mean, I think it depends on the motive of the officer. I mean, I think if an officer's motive is pure, they're just being proactive. I don't think their intention is to profile, but there may be officers that do profile, but I can't really speak for that.
So in general, whoever it happens to be in a car or walking on the street or whatnot, if it looks like it's possibility of some crime already happened, or maybe they think that these folks might be up to no good, they'll go check them out.
Yeah, and I think it's important if there's a perception of profiling, it's important to address that and for departments to be transparent and listen to the concerns. And some departments, have been forced to disclose data and have initially not been cooperative.
I see. All right, very good. There's a few other trends in policing that are relatively new that sound interesting. I've just heard of these recently, and I don't know what these are. Maybe you can explain these. Community policing. Let's do that one first. What's community policing?
Community policing has been prevalent, developed in the late 70s. Herman Goldstein, retired professor now at the University of Wisconsin, developed that and pioneered that in problem-oriented policing. And basically, the focus is to form partnerships in the community to work together to solve crimes and to share information.
So the different police officers will be assigned to different neighborhoods, and they'll get to know the people in the neighborhood. And so it's sort of like the cop on the beat, the old...
Yeah, it is. It could have a neighborhood officers assigned to a particular neighborhood. It could, patrol officers are encouraged to keep substations in neighborhoods, to get out on foot, to talk to people, to work cooperatively with other agencies and other leaders in the community. and that establishes trust and the sharing of information.
Now, not only that, but they're around more.
Yeah, and then the problem we're in policing is identifying where the problems are, assessing what the problem is, and how to address it to try to eliminate the problem.
Sounds like it would work.
Yeah, it's been very successful.
Oh, that's good.
Very
It's good to hear.
successful. Yeah.
And then what about problem-oriented policing, which you mentioned?
Yeah, that
What is that?
it's where you want to study where your police calls are and where the problems are. If there's a number of robberies that could be eliminated by better lighting, if it's a particular address or block number where there's disparity in police calls, it could be because something's going on in one building or one house. It could be, it's hard to tell, but I think you need to look at where the problems are and where the calls are, and then try to find out what the problem is and then come up with solutions to address it.
Well, that makes sense, too. I thought I had read that there was a bar that had lots of calls, police calls, so they were able to shut it down because of that?
Right, if there's violations of licensing or restrictions placed by local governments for things, if there's not compliance, licenses can be suspended or revoked. And
But just the fact of having lots of police calls there would cause them to lose their license?
it kind of depends on the circumstances, but if there's something that's happening with the management or the owners and it's not being addressed, it can lead to some restrictions, and there can be abatement processes.
Well, what about apartment buildings? If there happens to be a lot of police calls and crimes in a particular apartment building, can that landlord be forced to do something?
They can. If there's documented repeated drug activity and landlords or building managers are not cooperating, there can be legal processes that can be brought forward that can ultimately lead to your building being taken by the local government.
Really?
But it's a lengthy process. It goes through a lot of different points along the process, but it has been used in a number of places.
Is that only good in places that already have those laws in effect, or is pretty much anywhere in the country they could do that?
I don't know so much about the other states, but I know, regionally, if there's repeated documented drug activity and a landlord's not cooperating with the investigating law enforcement agency, there can be processes to take the building.
All right, fantastic. But in general, things are looking good. They're looking better.
Yes.
Crime-wise.
Mm-hmm.
Why not? Okay, that's wonderful. Wonderful. Well, that's about all the time we have for today. Thanks for being here.
Oh, you're
Roger.
welcome.
And thanks to you, our viewers, for tuning in on NewsDesk. And I'd like to also thank our director, Melissa Minkoff, technical director, Tony Zergibel, video editor, Katie Margalewski, at Master Controls, Ben Manon, on cameras, David Epp, and the writer for today's show, Stephanie Happ. Join us again next week for another episode of NewsDesk. That's Channel 95 analog, Channel 991 digital, on the internet at WYOU, also on YouTube at NewsDesk WYOU. Up next, the news with Amy Goodman. This is Jason Miller, WYOU, broadcasting from Madison, Wisconsin. Bye for now.